So when you start talking about putting together a presentation board, probably the best place to start is actually to think about other kinds of boards out there and get some inspiration for how you might want to lay out your board. Because there are really so many options, and in this case, it's a pretty simple project, but we definitely want to try and find an interesting way to present our ideas. And I have a Pinterest page with a number of different examples. For example, you can have white lines on a black background, or this is dark blue, I suppose. And look how interesting and nice that can look. And of course, in the case of projects that have colors in their textiles, that could be really interesting, or it could be horrific, especially if the colors don't match. Or you could use really a very softly tinted background. In this case, they have a kind of mild gradient on their project, which is a little strange. Anyway, or you can have things like, just a kind of very neatly organized project with a nice implied border. All the images are about the same distance from the border. Nice poche, good use of text. Obviously, these are mostly projects that are significantly larger than ours. But even something like this, where it's a single drawing and they have a nice, neat way of organizing all the notes and a kind of creative way of having the leader lines. A line with an arrow on the end of it is probably traditional, but it's absolutely possible to do other forms. This particular board is nice because I think the color scheme is very simple. The leader lines are very pleasant to look at. There's a good way of filling up some empty space. And then as far as the background colors, what they've done is they have basically solid shapes overlapping each other of different colors, and it just makes for a more dynamic presentation. It kind of organizes drawings. It gives white areas a natural border when they have a contrast. And again, it just makes for an interesting composition with your board. Now, we don't even know yet what size our boards are going to be. Some of these are square. Some of these are rectilinear. You can see here this is a square board, and it's kind of a square within a square. Actually, there's this big square image, but they've used a kind of gray overlay of that area to crop it down, which creates some very interesting overlaps. Again, a fairly simple project to look at. So step one is find some inspiration for your board. Then jump right into Adobe Illustrator. And I've started a blank drawing here just to show you starting from scratch. It is a roughly 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And when you don't know the size of the paper that you want, start with a big one. Absolutely, you can use the artboard tool as you go along to stretch things out. I'll just make this a little bigger. When you use the artboard tool, it does tell you down in the lower right what size the board is. You can also specify an exact dimension here in the artboard's palette. My pattern is pretty much square, so probably my artboard is going to end up being square. My board is going to end up being square, just because it would match the pattern. You don't have to, though, and perhaps your pattern is more horizontally oriented or more vertically oriented. So, in which case you might want a more horizontally or vertically oriented board. Our only limitation is 36 by 36 would be the largest, because 36 is the largest width we can print. Some of the boards that I looked at have a full bleed, which is to say the color goes all the way to the edge. And our printer cannot do that on its own. You have to basically print with roughly 1/4 inch margins and then count on trimming those down. So in that case, your maximum board size is 36 inches, but you'll have to count on trimming. So anyway, all right. So then the question is, why are we using Adobe Illustrator? Well, one of the things is if you're in Illustrator creating other things like your patterns, for example, it's pretty straightforward to get these objects into an Illustrator-based board. You can literally just have them open at the same time and copy, Command-C or Control-C, or edit copy, and go to your other drawing and paste. Okay, so that's a quick kind of way to get things in there without kind of altering them too much. And you can do that with other pieces too. For example, this project here also has my elevation. I could absolutely copy that guy in there, okay? Or I could place the drawing as well. Maybe copying is the easiest way to go. Again, edit, copy, and then go to your other drawing and edit and paste. Okay. The nice thing about doing it that way is you're absolutely assured that if you drew it to scale the first time, I'm just going to group this by the way, that it will come out to scale the next time around, okay, when you bring it into this drawing. When you place objects in Illustrator, and I'm just going to go to the File, Place menu, and let's say I want to use the love seat as a drawing. Then you run into the same problem that you run into with InDesign, which is that Adobe doesn't necessarily know how big that image is. All it knows is kind of how many pixels it is. And it will try to interpolate how big it is. If I just click once to place it, it will place the image at what it thinks the image size is. And this is a sort of a more advanced topic when we get to Photoshop. But suffice it to say that image number of pixels per inch is really the determining factor when you import objects. So usually it's best to kind of shrink them down. In this case, I'd probably want to show this couch at about the same size that I drew it at, just so that people can say, oh, that's the style of couch that you were working on. Okay. Now, other things that are nice about Adobe Illustrator is if you do have a Photoshop document, you can place that document as well. So I'll just select the Photoshop document, always being sure to choose this link option. Otherwise, the object will be embedded in your document. There are a number of options that are available with most types of files, but this is the Photoshop one. And like a photograph, you do need to size it when it enters the file, so make sure that you understand that this file can't be too big or it'll get pixelated. You just go to the File, Place menu and find a Photoshop document here. I'll use the pattern document here. One nice thing is that you can also link those documents here. And what that does is if you make changes to the original, and here I'll place this Illustrator document to show you how that one works. When you place it, it will update based on any changes that you, if you change the original. So this is really handy if you're, say, working with somebody else. Now, usually we're just kind of working on our own laptops, and so it's not as much of an issue about collaboration, in which case it is nice to kind of stay within the same platform, especially once you get into drawing mode with Illustrator. So the only other thing that is really nice about Illustrator is that you can have a lot of really good text and line tools. So for example, let me show you a nice text tool here that we have. I drew, well, first of all, it does have just like the regular old type tool. You can click once to place text, and it will just place a piece of text, and the text box will be the size of the text that you placed in there. But you can, as you can see, resize it just by using the grips, and that you can also warp the text, which is kind of fun. I don't know why you would do that. It's almost illegible. Anyway, with that same text tool, you can also draw a box, and it will fill in the box. So if you happen to have any text on your clipboard, we'll fill it in. Otherwise, it fills it in with some sort of default text, which is actually an old printer's test text. The other text tools that it has that are really fun, one that I particularly like, there's this vertical area type text tool. What that is, you can take a shape and I'll just click on it and paste in the default text. You can fill a shape with text, and it will, if you modify the shape using grips, the text will scroll to fit, or if you drag the text up, see how there's a little plus sign? That indicates that there's actually more text that is not being shown. What's neat is you can click that and then draw a new text box, and the missing text, see how there's this line indicating where it goes? That missing text will show up in that other box, which is kind of fun. In fact, if you continue to type, the typing will scroll into the next box. So it's kind of a cool way if you want to divide up text to do so. Anyway, the other cool thing about these text boxes, let me get back to the original, is they can be rotated. So when you rotate the text, the box will alter, and in fact, it's an object, like all objects in Illustrator. They can be fiddled around with using a number of different tools. And again, you can stretch it out so that the text fits in there. Really fun ways to do it. The last really fun one is, well, I mean, they're all really fun, but there is a type along a path tool. And again, I don't have anything particularly to type, but I can move my mouse over a path, click on it, and you can see that the text fills in naturally. And of course, all of these text options are available in a number of different formats, sizes, all the usual arrangements for modifying text. So you can really have a lot of fun working with some of these pieces of text. But the other really good reason to use Illustrator is for all the different types of lines that are available. So I'm just going to draw a rectangle, for example. I'll give it no fill, but give it a nice black stroke here. When I draw the rectangle, what you'll see, it was, of course, and of course you can draw rectangles in any program. But what's nice is there are all sorts of interesting line types that are available in Illustrator that aren't available in other programs. All you have to do, if you go to the brushes menu, this kind of shows all the brushes that are available in your document, but then I can go to, there's all sorts of other ones. For example, there's all these different kinds of borders that are out there. I'll just call up that menu and kind of stretch it out to show you what some of these options are. And some of them, some of them are obviously a little hokey, but some of them are quite interesting. Maybe this one would go particularly well with my color scheme or with my dotty kind of scheme. And each of these borders is responsive to the size up here on the stroke size. So you'll want to play around with that and really come up with something that works nicely with your project. By the way, you can also type in a number for the stroke if you want. Whoops, oh, that wasn't what I was expecting. There we go. And so you can come up with some really interesting and nice lines, different types of boxes. Here, I'll take a look at some of these. Some are quite traditional, so if you have a very traditional looking title block, or you want a traditional looking border around an individual element, you can use those to pretty dramatic effect. You can also, if you don't feel like drawing something, these are elements that can be used, and again, they can be scaled in any number of ways. Coloring them is a little more challenging, but needless to say, these are quite interesting. Anyway, each of these materials that you use in your model, in your drawing, can be edited. Just double click on them here in the brushes menu, and it gives you a number of options, and you can kind of fiddle around. You can create custom lines using your own materials, and you can also even change some of these peculiar corners and things like that. You can kind of really customize it. Each one of them is totally different, though, so obviously it's important to choose one first. The other thing is that you can come in here and pretty easily draw things like arrows. Here, I'll just point at this guy here, and we'll draw a nice line. And let me zoom in on this object here and give it a little bit of line weight here. It's a little light for my tastes for an arrow. Every object just by getting the appearance, or I'm sorry, getting the stroke menu. If you go to the stroke palette, there are a lot more options for how the line is handled. And this is true for these straight ones drawn with the regular pencil or the curvature lines. They all have options to get different arrows, and there are a lot of different kinds of arrows. Each one, I always get the wrong side. I don't know why that is. Each one of these is going to have quite a different look to your project. You'll have to just choose one that is really going to work for you. That's probably a little bolder, although that would definitely make for a very nice north arrow. So anyway, there you go, and you can even scale the size of these arrows here if it's a little big. There we go. That's a little more like it. Okay, and again, these are strokes. You can edit them if you so desire using the direct selection tool. Okay. There we go. I tend to like the arrowheads. The tail's a little straight. Anyway, so arrows are yet another thing that is really nice to do in Illustrator. And once you've got one that you like, use your select tool, and while holding down the option button, you can make a copy of it pretty easily. And then that copy obviously is independent. You can move it around and edit it as you see fit. Now, another tool that is available in Illustrator, if you have a bunch of objects selected and you kind of want to arrange them, align them in different ways, this is a tool that is also available in InDesign. There is an align panel, depending on how many objects you've got selected and how they are selected. You can distribute objects in any number of different ways. For example, we can align them all to the top here, like that. We can align them to the center, which in this case is the same, or the bottom, which is the same because they're all squares. We can also distribute them more evenly, and that's kind of nice. It ends up being the same in all of these. So, and you can also specify a certain distance if you'd rather distribute them evenly. So those are organizational tools that are really handy. Now, one other piece that I'd like you to add to this project is a description of the color scheme that you are using in your different colorways. And there are a number of different ways that you can do it. You can write something out, but the best way, I think, is to actually be a little more scientific about it and use a color analysis tool that's available through the good folks that brought you Illustrator. You can take a picture of this pattern and apply it, and it will give you a color distribution. Let me just go over here and show you on the Adobe page. And this link, by the way, this is the Adobe Creative Cloud color page. That link, if you go to our pages section of Canvas, down here at the bottom, there's a section for color theory and tools. And if you go to that, there's a number of different ways you can do this. And I'm just showing the Adobe one because I think it's particularly robust. And what's neat about this is if you're not sure what colors to use, you can use this color picker. And in fact, this you can extract RGB values for these colors, which can then be imported into Illustrator. And if you're just like, I don't even know what complementary is, you can look on this tool. But the best part is that there is the ability to create a color wheel from an image. And all we need to do is get an image of our color scheme. And lo and behold, Illustrator makes that pretty easy. There's a whole palette called the Asset Export palette. And if I open that up, what you can do, you can basically export this as a picture. And in fact, we can even specify the value either in pixels or just in dimensions. And we can even specify different file formats. PNG is just Jim Dandy for us. So if I add the selected artwork, and in this case this is the artwork I've selected, to the panel, and then just click the export button, what it will do, it will save it into whatever folder you choose, and obviously this is the Mac folder organizational system. And it usually puts it into a folder labeled by whatever your setting was. So 300 ppi is the one that I chose, and I did it already so you could see what the folder looks like. So now if I go to my color wheel here on the Adobe Color Creative Cloud, I can click and browse for my image file. Okay, and this is a fun image file that you can put as your screensaver. You can email it to your friends or whatever. Post it on the internet. Anyway, what it does is it samples all the colors that it finds. And in fact, it even gives you kind of a mood that it is extracting from that. But then you can also click on the color wheel, and here is, in fact, a color wheel that you can use in Adobe. And you can even use the entire screen if you want, because it has a lot of information about these colors, particularly if you're doing a more detailed color analysis. For us, just the part of the screen that has the color wheel is fine. And in fact, you can do a screenshot of that. On Mac, it's Command-Shift-4, I believe, allows you to take kind of a screenshot of an area of your screen. And if you could hear it on the recording, it makes a little camera sound. On a PC, it's Option Print Screen that allows you to take a picture of usually a window within Windows. Control Print Screen takes a picture of the whole screen. Okay, and then obviously depending on the system that you have, you'll need to track down where that image is. So let's go back to Adobe, and I'll go and I'll place that image. And I need to remember where my computer puts them. I think it's in Photographs. Let's see what happens here. Oh, no, I know where it goes. It goes on the desktop on a Mac. Okay. On a PC, I believe it puts it on the clipboard, and you can just paste it in, Control-V. So anyway, I'll place that image in here, and there we go. I've got my color analysis down for this particular project. Obviously, I wanted to. So once you are in Illustrator, there really aren't a lot of things that you can do with the image, other than some of the effects that we looked at when we were drawing our beanbag. So even if I just want to crop this image, I have to use an Illustrator tool. In this case, I'll use a clipping mask. I'll just come in and draw a circle that is roughly the size of the circle I want to clip behind. And it doesn't even matter what the pattern is and all that. All I need to do is select those two objects, right-click on them, and choose Make Clipping Mask. And it will crop the front image from the back. And you can see I've messed up a little bit. So I can come in here, if I double-click on it, and I can edit it using the arrow keys. I can even come back in and make it a little bigger if I want to get a nice little halo around this object. It can be a little challenging to get it exactly right, but probably better is to crop it a little small rather than a little big. And then just click outside of the image to finish editing. So there you go. You've got kind of a nice diagram describing your color scheme. And of course, when you recolored your patterns in Illustrator, what you may have done, if you used some of the ready-made color schemes in Illustrator, you'll probably see that those are pretty clear instances of patterns. So those are the basic kind of tools for organization. The only thing that we haven't talked about is what if you want some kind of background element to the project. Several of the boards we looked at had kind of gradients. And those really are pretty simple. You just use those, create those using variations on either the rectangle tool and creating, say, a big rectangular area, okay? And then when you draw it, right now I actually drew that with an invisible stroke and an invisible fill pattern. You can use any number of different textures. I think we looked at gradients that were fades last time. These can be very effective to use. Obviously, it has to work with your project. So some of these are quite bold. You obviously would not want to use those under every circumstance. But you can see that this is a pretty bold background. First of all, you'll want to make sure that that background is in fact behind everything else. Okay, so I'll just fade to back and you see how it brings the other objects forward. And then that object, you can control a number of things. You can just sort of lower the opacity if it's a bit much. But you can also go to the gradients panel. And within the gradients panel, you can actually get some controls. You can just literally click here to create new kind of gradient grips. And you can spread the whole thing out a little bit, or you can even double click on the color and make the edges a little bit less than 100% opaque. And again, there's sort of infinite options here, but you can really create a lot of interesting effects. It's just a matter of designing something that you think is going to work with your project. I'm not really sure that goes with the bubbliness, but maybe just as a light background, it'll be okay. Anyway, and in addition to that, there are the usual sorts of shapes. I would just recommend choosing shapes which are not going to be too distracting. And remember that even shapes, I'm going to use the curvature tool here and maybe create, I don't know. Oh, here, I'll use the pen tool and draw a shape that starts out as fairly rectilinear, but then click and drag and drag and drag. And you see how you can create some interesting effects here. Those edges, that can be a little bit bold. So again, you'll want to manipulate the objects that you create, or you can even apply effects. For example, blur can be a good one on these backgrounds so that they're just a little softer. Otherwise, whoops, preview. Otherwise, it can be a bit much. Sometimes they'll take quite a while to generate. But you can see here that the background, that's a lot softer and not nearly as distracting. So now you've got your beautiful board. By the way, just as I'm looking at this, I'm realizing the patterns here have a lot of transparency. You absolutely could go and edit the transparency as we remove the transparency from the pattern. You could also literally just copy the object, paste a copy of it right in back of the original, and then make that copy that's in back solid. And there you go, you have an instant solid background behind your object. And that's actually an opportunity. You can add a border or something like that. Anyway, okay, got distracted. So, okay, we've got our perfect board now. Maybe some things could be changed, but the basic rule of thumb when you're printing your board is don't print your board from Adobe Illustrator. And this is true for InDesign as well. What you're going to want to do is choose File, and first of all, make sure you save the document if you haven't already, but then just choose Save As. And there are a number of different options in the Save As menu, but PDF is going to be really the best option. And then just label the file and click Save. And that's the file that you can go and take to the desktops over in the print lab. Anyway, and there are a number of different options in here in the PDF creator. I have the Adobe PDF, which comes with the Adobe Creative Cloud. So there are a number of presets that I would strongly recommend you use. First of all, if you have just a massive file size, you can use smallest file size to reduce it. But generally, press quality or high quality print are going to get you a better result. And obviously, this is something that we're printing high quality because we have a large, very nice printer. Anyway, and so I would recommend using that. And there are other options in here which I would definitely recommend not fiddling around with unless you feel like doing a lot of internet research. And then just save your PDF, and that is the file that you can go and create. And this is the same for PC or Mac. Do yourself a favor and use the Adobe printing option And if you don't have it installed on your computer, go to the Adobe website, and as part of your Creative Cloud subscription, you'll get a PDF writer. Now, if you're somebody who's trying to not pay for all that expensive software, go to Canvas, and there are, under my free links grouping, you'll find some links that will take you to free PDF writers for the PC.